The reason I'm so grateful that you came today is because the reality is we're losing too many of our teenagers. Would you agree with that? I was in local work for 9.5 years, most of that spent in youth ministry. I could tell you story after story after story of my youth group all-stars who showed up on Facebook when they got to college, touching their girlfriends in certain areas and drinking certain beverages. These were the kids that weren't on the edge. These were the kids waiting at the Lord's Supper table. So when you consider that, you have to understand, I approach this from a standpoint of, I can tell you names and I can give you faces. The idea is it's not funny anymore to me. I gave up on I guess you would call it the contemporary youth minister concept. Because I got into this saying it's all about pizza, Six Flags, and paintball. And then I realized that if that's what we're putting out in our schools, folks, the statistics aren't changing. In the religious world, we're losing 75% across the religious board. And amongst the churches of Christ, we're losing roughly 1 out of every 2. And that's while we're playing paintball. That's while we're taking them to Six Flags. And that's buying them all the pizza they can eat. The reality is, it's not working. I couldn't sleep at night. Lay my head on the pillow as a youth minister saying, well, at least we're saving 1 out of every 2. You tell me in your respective congregations, if you had to send 50% of your children off to Satan for the first 2 years they went to a school, which 50% would you send? Because that's what's happening right now in the Church of Christ. Some of those kids will come back. I don't want to present an all doom and gloom. Some of them will come back on their own, and there's a lot of reasons why this is taking place. But what I propose to you today is we've got to do something. We've got to do something. And I appreciate your presence today because you recognize what I'm talking about. I want to show you a couple of these headlines from some newspapers just to give you a hint of where we are in culture. You know, the recession has hit everybody. And the Washington Post, as of Friday, February the 12th, said, recession has more moms entering the workforce. That may not surprise you, but within this particular article, this mother who used to stay home talks about the time she no longer has to spend with her children. It's not a lesson on should moms go to the workplace. What it is a lesson of is, even within the last few years, things have changed. So whereas Dad maybe at one time he was the major breadwinner, folks, that even has changed, which has cut into parents spending time with their kids. What about this concept from the New York Times, the same date, or February the 10th is when it was published. Do-it-yourself genetic engineering. This particular article is dealing with the concept of engineering vegetables, engineering all kinds of things to better improve them. But it gets into the concept of using that same technology with human beings. What about this concept? This was something that may blow your mind a little bit. You've all known that we as a society are very loose when it comes to sexuality. There's actually a movement within society called polyamory, which means this. We're not going to sleep around on everybody. We're going to pick 3 or 4 individuals and make that our family. So you might have 3 women and 2 men, and that just be your group. You're not married, or if you are married, it's okay because you'll share each other with other people in your family. Folks, that's happening in America. It even goes beyond the cohabitation concept, but what it does scream is it's time to do something. It's time to do something because well-minded parents wonder why when their kids get to a certain age, they lose interest. Is it possible that as we strive our best to raise children, as we strive our best to impact young people, that the amount of time that we have is not countering the amount of time Satan has with them through avenues such as the mass media, through avenues such as their schooling and the teaching of the history books being rewritten, as health classes, folks, are being redefined as far as what is the traditional family. Do you know that's being redefined today? It is no longer the concept of dad, mom, and children. If you go through a family ministry course, they will tell you real quick, if you don't recognize what's going on in family units, you're going to be ineffective of reaching those families. Folks, it's serious. And it's time to do something. I want you to understand, it starts with this concept, though. The reality of there is a battle taking place, and that battle is over worldview. The way we view life, the way we view everything that we encounter. We're going to start with one of two places. We're either going to start with what the world says, or a secular worldview, or we're going to begin with the Bible. Those are your only options. So when you sit down and you try to influence other people, and you think about things such as stem cell research, you think about things such as mercy killings or euthanasia, you think about moral and ethical issues, we all begin with either where the world tells us to begin or where the Bible tells us to begin. That's why when you read Paul's writing to the brethren in Corinth, he talks about this war that we're engaged in. But he says it's not the idea if I'm bigger than you and stronger than you, I can come up and punch you in the face or kill you with a gun. He says where this battle's engaged was with the minds and the hearts and the thought process that we're dealing with. That's why we're building up these teachings and we're destroying the fortresses. All with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's why when a child sits into a freshman class in science, even a place as close as TCU, Texas Christian University, there are 4 professors that are brought in that are experts in the field of evolution, and a young man raised as a preacher's son can leave there and go ask his grandmother, is it possible that they're right? Folks, that was me. It's real convincing when you leave the confines of your youth group and of your parents' house. I was grateful to have a godly grandmother that could answer questions. The reality is, though, many people don't, and that's why this is the front lines, but not on the issue of evolution. If you want that, go hear Brad. He does a great job. Dr. Harab does a great job with that. I want to tell you about something else because there's something else going on the front lines. And the idea of the agendas that we're going to deal with in this particular lesson. There was a report that came out, published September 23rd, 2009. And in this particular report, it said, Austin didn't know what to wear to his first gay dance last spring. It was bad enough that the gangly 13-year-old from Sand Springs, Oklahoma, anybody ever heard of that place? Had to go without his boyfriend at the time, a 14-year-old star athlete at another middle school. But there were also laundry issues. I don't have any clean clothes, he complained to me by text message, his favored method of communication. That same article, he would go on to say this, half the girls I know are bisexual. And folks, you're going to get from me today a very respectful presentation. But I'm also the guy who says we've been sugarcoating and not dealing with things for too long. We've got to address this issue. Because as young people as early as 13 years old are coming to the conclusion that they're either gay or they're bisexual. Folks, I'm not the smartest guy in the jar, but I know this much, that as I read and research, the 13-year-old's brain, as far as the sexual center of it, it's not fully developed. So how do they come to the conclusion at 13 that I'm a homosexual or that I'm a bisexual individual? If it's not taught to them through other avenues. That part of their brain is not fully developed. It's not there. Yet for some reason these people come to this conclusion that this is what's going on. I want you to think back in American history for a minute to around the turn of the 1700s to the 1800s. And I want you to ask a question, 2 quick questions. As you consider this family unit, where is the dad in that picture? Chances are he's working somewhere. They had to work hard back then. And chances are as well, he didn't have a job outside of the house. He had a job around the house. But where's the son at that time? If he had multiple sons, which they did at that time, the children, it's interesting. I'm doing a study right now on a new seminar that's going to be entitled Raise the Bar. And it's about the time in America where the word teenager was not even in our vocabulary. And what was America like then, the expectations on young people, compared to where we are today and what's going on with that age demographic. It's amazing that in the days gone by, the more children you had meant more money. Because they would add to the family pot through their work effort and whatever they did. Today, if you have more children, what's that typically mean? You have less money. You think about the change that's taking place in America. Anyhow, the son's working with his dad. Even somebody as young as my 6-year-old Colton would be out in the field. If I'm plowing with Betsy, he's picking up rocks and throwing them out of the field. What about the girls with their moms? You get the picture, right? This was a time where moms and daughters spent time together and sons and fathers spent time together. We live in such a fast-paced society, we have to have personal organizers today to find out where I'm going to go pick up this child from this sporting event to take them to this social event, and maybe, just maybe, we'll sit down and have dinner together tonight. Here's an added bonus for you. You ready for this? You want to start making a difference in society? Statistics will tell us that if we as family units will sit down at least 3 times a week and eat a meal uninterrupted, that our children are less likely to become sexually active before marriage. You tell me the correlation, I know this much. It means quality time. It means quality conversation. We're not there anymore, folks. That's not America anymore. It's also not America when you find individuals like this in our past, George Washington, who will say that it's impossible to rightly govern without God in the Bible. Or Patrick Henry, who would say it cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this nation was founded not by religionists but by Christians. And not on religions but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. You say, Patrick Henry said that? Sure did. And you can't say that anymore, Patrick. Don't you know you won't get reelected to office, Patrick? It's politically incorrect, Patrick. Or what about this man right here, Thomas Jefferson, where if you go to the Jefferson Memorial on panel 3, you will read about a president of the United States who says he trembles for his country. Why? Because of the economic status? No. Because he doesn't know what Great Britain's going to do? No. He trembles for his country because he realizes that God is just and that His wrath will not be withheld from America forever. See, the history books have been rewritten, folks. And I'm here to tell you, first step in confronting culture is realizing we don't live in the 1920s anymore. We don't live in the 1950s. We don't even live in the 1960s. Young people today who are raised, most of them who are teenagers, were born in 1990 to today. You think of America from 1990. They don't know what it was like in the 1970s, folks. They don't know what it was like in the 1950s. You think about what's going on with the families from 1990 to today. It's crucial that we remember that. I want to take you on a little journey as we look at this concept. In Genesis chapter 12, if you want to write this down, you can. I'm going to turn to Exodus chapter 3, but I want to reference Genesis chapter 12. There's a call of Abram, and he's called to leave 3 things in particular there that God is basically, if you do the detailed study of Genesis chapter 12, there are multiple blessings. But he's calling Abram to leave the comforts and the security that we know as human beings. I want you to leave your place, your country. The idea with that is he was in a place that at least had some sort of economy. You were either in a place where there was a settlement or you were a wanderer, you were a traveler. He's in a place that it's believed to have some sort of an economy. So you have the comforts, you have the stability of that. He's called to leave his relatives and he's called to leave his father's house. This was still a time where much of the wealth was known through the father. Abram would leave with some of that. But in calling to leave his relatives, he's called to leave the security. They had no police force. That's why when Lot is taken captive later on in the book of Genesis, it's Abraham and the 300 mighty men of valor born in his house that go after him. So in Genesis 12, we find God calling Abram to completely rely upon Him and to go to a land that I'll show you. To which he does. The Bible will record. But it's in Exodus chapter 3 we learn more about this land. Genesis chapter 12, the land's promised. Exodus chapter 3, beginning with verse 7, the New American Standard reads this way. The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters. For I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, to bring them up from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite. There's a lot of ites. But what you need to know is this. In that land that's promised, it's good and spacious. We all want that. We all want that for America. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. You can provide for your families, is what He's telling them. But He also says it's inhabited with pagans. And not just any pagans, folks, inhabited with Canaanites. Have you ever wondered why, if God being all-powerful, and these are some of the questions I have as I continue to study and learn. God being all-powerful, if He doesn't want His people to be influenced by anything around them, why didn't He create a place and keep it in a bubble and not allow Canaanites to go there? Is it possible that there's more about the nature of God discovered from Genesis 12 and Exodus 3 than we might realize? Is it possible He has a plan for His people and He has expectations for His people? Oh, there's a word you don't hear much. God has expectations for His people? Sure He does. And He gives wonderful blessings, but He also has high expectations. You see the twofold concept? God did not do this accidentally, folks. But what does He require? I want you to look at one other passage this morning, and I'll show you a couple other things. Leviticus chapter 18. The book of Leviticus is a wonderful study in of itself. It's a study of what God wants and what He doesn't want. It's truly a study of holiness. And when you consider what's taking place in the first 17 chapters, it's what He wants in the areas of sacrifice and what He wants in the area of worship to Him. But in Leviticus chapter 18, 19, and 20, we see almost a pause as far as the worship concept to the practical living concept within a society that does not look to Jehovah God for guidance. And I want you to read beginning with verse 20. It says, "You shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her. Shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female is an abomination. Also you shall not have intercourse with any animal to be defiled with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion." Listen to verse 24. "Do not defile yourself by any of these things. For by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled." That's what's taking place in Canaan, folks. That is the Promised Land. The Promised Land has adultery. The Promised Land has child sacrifice. You heard specifically the god Moloch mentioned. Moloch was an image carved that had a hollowed out belly, a portion of it. There was a fire blazing in it. Moms and dads would give their babies to priests who served at that god. They would throw the baby into the fire. The baby is burning alive. And they had drummers that would play at the base of the idol. Why? To drown out the cries of the child. So mom and dad would not run into that. And you say, what type of society did God send His people into? One of adultery? One of bestiality? One of homosexuality? One of idol worship? You see, you've heard of Baal before, the chief of the Canaanite pantheon. You've heard of Asherah, who is the female counterpart to that. But here's my question. Does America struggle with any of this stuff that we've just read was taking place in the land of Canaan? Folks, we struggle with all of it. So where are we supposed to turn when it comes to families confronting culture? Let's look at some of this stuff. And I'll tell you a biblical answer for it. The idea, do we worship a pagan idol today? Sometimes we do, folks. And it's the God that stares right back at us in the mirror every morning at times in our society. We're known as a very selfish society. And I want to demonstrate that through some of these agendas that are at place in America. The first one is the idea of child sacrifice. You say, that doesn't say child sacrifice, that says abortion. I know what it says. And I've done the homework on it, folks. And I know that the judges that came out of the Roe versus Wade case, they would say that if we can define when life begins, then all of this issue over abortion would be gone away with. It would be answered. So the issue is when life begins. That's what he said, but I'm here to propose to you today, politically, that's no longer the issue. It's about campaign donations. It's about re-elections. It's not about when life begins, because scientifically we know something. We know that in order for there to be human life, you have to have human genetic makeup and you have to have cellular metabolism. If somebody chokes an individual, they will die, but it's because they die at the cellular level. Their cells stop metabolizing, meaning the factories within our cells, they die one at a time. If somebody is shot or they're cut, they can bleed out, but that's because they die at the cellular level. If we ever stop metabolizing at the cellular level, we will have dead cells. You have enough dead cells, you have a dead body. That makes sense, right? Do you know that cellular metabolism and human genetic makeup are both at play as soon as the egg and the sperm unite? It's no longer about when life begins. As a matter of fact, we're inconsistent about this issue in America. You ever heard of Scott Peterson? Scott Peterson in California wanted to kill his wife, Lacey Peterson. Lacey's pregnant with a child. He kills his wife, thus killing the baby. Now, granted, if a woman goes into an abortion clinic today in America and kills her baby, there are no charges. Scott Peterson kills his wife, who also was with child. He's charged with double homicide. How is that consistent in America? If we even just ask to be consistent, how is that consistent? Okay, you tell me that that's not a life, then why are you charging Scott Peterson with a homicide of something that's not a life? It's not consistent. Another aspect of this I want you to consider. If we saw an older person or a teenager on life support in a hospital, they have to have a breathing machine, they have to have a feeding tube within them to sustain life. Would we dare look at that being on the table and say that's not a human? No, because we can know people that have come off of life support and they sustain life. Why is it then when a child is within the mother's womb hooked up to life support through the umbilical cord, he will receive oxygen and food, we will say that is not a child. That is not a human being. It's not consistent, folks. That's what I'm telling you. It's not about when life begins. It's about the worship of self. And this is an agenda that is attacking us. You know, since Roe versus Wade, there have been over 50 million children who have been crucified. They have been sacrificed to this God. Planned Parenthood will tell you that 1 out of every 3 women by the time they're 45 has at least 1 abortion. Now, you know Planned Parenthood, the largest nonprofit government-sponsored organization in America, that they have an agenda. That agenda has been exposed multiple times through hidden cameras and through interviews, such as one that we have in Think Magazine with a lady who just got out of Planned Parenthood after having watched her first abortion, realizing that the child actually could feel what was going on. I asked a group of people, and I'm constantly learning. There was a sweet lady from Oregon who had been a nurse for well over 60 years, and she came up to me and she said, "Joe, I think I can tell you where they get their statistics from." She said at one time in medical terminology, there was no difference between a purposed abortion and an accidental abortion. We might call that a miscarriage today. She said the word was the same in medical terminology for the longest of time. And so if you take all of the babies who were aborted, either purposed or not, and you lump them in the abortion category, it's possible to misconstrue the data, is what she said. Isn't that interesting why somebody in America would want to make us think that everybody's having an abortion, especially a place that uses abortion as family planning? Think there's an agenda at play? Absolutely. Here are reasons why we're having abortions in America. They're not Christian statistics. You can find them just as easy as I can. Number one reason that I want you to see is we say we're not ready. 1 out of every 4 abortions that occur in America come out of the concept of I'm not ready to have the child. I was ready to play on Friday night, but I'm not ready to pay the piper now. The idea, can't afford the baby, don't want the baby. I want you to look all the way down to the very end. Because I have found this is the number one reason why Christians think that abortion should be legal in the cases of rape and incest. Folks, that is awful. Rape and incest is horrible. I've counseled with too many young ladies who have been the recipient of that rape or that incest. And it is horrible. But where we have to start looking at is when we read the Bible, do we read a God of situation ethics? Meaning God changes with the circumstance. In no way, shape, or form can we as a Christian say that is okay that rape or incest happened. But we also have to realize it's not the child's fault how they were conceived. And yet God still recognizes that child as life. You know, in the book of Exodus, if a woman was with child and 2 men got in a fight, and the one man was pushed into the woman, and the woman gave birth and the child died, what was required in the Old Testament? Eye for eye and tooth for tooth. It was life for life. You took a life, your life can be required of you. I wonder what God views that. See, most abortions in America occur before the 13th week. This is a child born at 21 weeks old. Does it look like a human being to you? Sustaining life, yes. That ring here, that's a band. Looks like a big band. It's the nurse's wedding ring. There are children in America being killed, sacrificed at this age. I want you to see something, though, because I tell you there's agendas at play. There's something in America called the Freedom of Choice Act that simply says this. It says that we need to allow the use of Medicaid for abortions in America. Now, the issue of should money be allowed out of the tax bracket to go to overseas abortions or here has been going on for some time. But this is trying to be pushed today in America. It also says this, we need to take the steps to secure our right to choose. And then we'll go on to list that basically if you're against abortion, you don't understand the intelligence and compassion that women possess. It's time to write Roe v. Wade into law. Which is interesting because if people will actually interview the woman involved with the Roe v. Wade case, Norma McCorvey, they will come to find out that she works at a clinic trying to talk young ladies out of having abortions today. Focus Press interviewed her in 2006, and at that time she said she was pro-life. You heard the doctor, the abortion doctor, Dr. Tiller, that was just killed, and I do not advocate extremists on either side. But Norma McCorvey stood up and said that Dr. Tiller should be charged with his inappropriate activities in murdering children as well. That's the lady involved with Roe versus Wade, folks. But it's not about that anymore. It's about politics. And it's about agendas teaching our children and our grandchildren the value of life. I want you to see this right here too. Because there was homosexuality taking place in the land of Canaan. But that idea of homosexuality, folks, has been around for a long time. But I want you to realize that it's hit almost a pinnacle in our minds today. But it didn't start with the year 2010. It didn't start with the year 2008. In 1980, there was a group of 175 leading activists that gathered together in Warrenton, Virginia, and held what they called a war conference. You can read the book, After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. Their plan was to conquer America. And they were going to do so by overcoming this fear and hatred, is the way they penned it. The authors would map out on page 163 and say, the campaign we outline in this book, though complex, depends centrally upon a program of unabashed propaganda, firmly grounded in long-established principles of psychology and advertising. It's interesting, the two authors of this book, one went to MIT, the other went to Harvard. One had a degree in psychology, one had a degree in advertising. They said, we're going to make it look appealing. We're going to mess with your brains, and we're going to win. My question is this: are they winning is not the question. The question is, how are they winning? Because that occurred in 1988, folks. And I want you to think about what you hear today over the mass media. Do you know, in 1988, they said, we're going to change the terminology. They said, we're no longer going to refer to this as a homosexual activity. We're going to refer to it as being gay. After all, gay carried a positive connotation in generations in the past, and we're going to change the terminology. That was in 1988. They also said, we're going to stand on the coattails of individuals who fought for the rights to sit at certain places on the bus, or to drink out of water fountains, or to walk through certain doors, the civil rights movement. So anymore today, the question of are they winning, it's not about homosexuality as a moral behavior. It's about gay marriage is our right. Human rights, the civil right concept, redefining the terms. Folks, that's a simple debate tactic. If you've ever had any debate classes or you've ever heard anybody debate, if I can get you to debate me and you're on my terms, I control how we are debating. I want you to allow me to define the terms. Because if you do that, then that means you have to step out of your comfort zone. Folks, that's what they've done. And I want to make this very clear, lest this be misunderstood. The Bible never teaches hatred of an individual for the sin in their life. It teaches standing up for the truth of God's Word against the sin in their life. This is not about whether Christians love homosexuals. Jesus Christ died for them just the same as He died for us. It's about the sin. But in this particular seminar, it's about the agenda. Because we also have the responsibility to raise faithful children. We have the responsibility to take the gospel to a world. And if that world sees you and I as being intolerant because we go against what the social norm is seeming to become, folks, that can hinder, that can hurt, that can hurt the receptiveness of the gospel message. It doesn't hurt the gospel. It can hurt them receiving it. So I want to make that very clear. I also want to make this clear that one of the ways they're succeeding is because they have a lot of money. And I say succeeding, please understand, the homosexual population in America is somewhere around 7%. And that's on the high end. So it's not as if necessarily that there are more individuals that are saying yes, 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 but they're changing mindsets. And that's where we have to realize this battle's going. It's about the way we think about this sin. It's about the acceptedness of this sin. It's about are they born that way or are they not born that way. PepsiCo made sure that they gave money to help push this agenda. Now, you'll be happy to know that the American Family Association, just as of late, rescinded their boycott of Pepsi. So if you were used to drinking Mountain Dew and you gave it up, according to the AFA, they have said Pepsi's making some steps to improve that. But there's a lot of money that's been sent towards that agenda. There's also TV shows that are helping push that agenda. If you've ever heard of The Family Guy, on this particular issue, March the 8th of 2009, they teamed with Fox and with PepsiCo and pushed this agenda over the airwaves. It's also being pushed in forms such as car commercials. I don't know when was the last time you stopped to look at commercials on your TV, but this is a Hyundai commercial where a woman is driving with a man that's younger than her, They pull up to a stoplight. He's got to recline his chair for some reason, and it'll go on to tell you because there's a man in the other car that she feels she has to show her dry cleaning to. Thus, the indication is that's her husband. So you have adultery selling cars. As they pull away, he will recline the seat back up like they got away with something. But I want you to see as they drive away, the man reclines his seat up, and there's another man sitting beside. Now, the equation has to be, first of all, both individuals are caught in adultery. The one is, though, a woman and a man. The other is a man and a man. Now, why they pick on cowboys, I don't know. I haven't found an answer for that. But the reality is, what did you learn about automobiles by that commercial? You learn the seat of the passenger side can go down and up. That's it. Now, I took away the voice. Sure, I did. Because it's real easy to not see the message for the rhetoric that they throw at us. I want you to see that. I also want you to see, folks, it's being pushed not just in California, but here's an example of it being pushed in California on their kindergarten students of anti-hate speech pledge cards. Again, I'm not for hate speech, but what does a kindergartner know about homosexuality when it comes to hate? Nothing. It's being indoctrinated to them. It's being taught to them. But the question always comes back to this right here, does it not? Are they born that way? Because if they're born that way, then I'm being pretty rough and tough. And if I'm born that way, then we as Christians have to change our message. I want you to see some of the top 4 research that's come out of the question, are they born that way? Simon LeVay, 1991, Salk Institute for Biological Studies, San Diego, California. He studied dead people's brains. And he wanted to bring in heterosexual men, heterosexual women, and homosexual men. He studied the neuron group around the sexual center of the brain to see if those neurons group sizes were the same in homosexual men as they were in heterosexual women, i.e. then their sex drive would be the same, their orientation would be the same. Well, what he found out was some of those homosexual men had the largest neuron groups. Some of them matched the heterosexual women, and some of them had the smallest. They were inconsistent in his results. That's not good in science. It was also alleged that he tampered with the material, and he tampered with his investigation, his research. Well, all of which would lead him to conclude in a statement, it's important to stress what I didn't find. I did not prove that homosexuality is genetic or find a genetic cause for being gay. I want you to consider this, the Bailey-Pillard twin study. If homosexuality is genetic and individuals cannot help it, that is the argument, that is the statement. 2 identical twins who have just same exact genetic makeup. If it is not helped and it's all based on genetics, the idea is both of them should be homosexual if one is. That was what they looked at. They found 56 pairs of identical twins. 52% of the time, if one were a homosexual, the other was as well. Folks, what that does say, though, is basically 1 out of every 2 times they were not. That's not good for their hypothesis that homosexuality is genetic. I would choose another lifestyle if I could. They take choice. Now you say, wait a minute now, the genes can be expressed in multiple ways, even with identical twins. I understand that, but you cannot allow people to redefine the argument in the middle of the discussion. That's a redefinition of the argument. The argument is, I cannot help it because it's genetic. If it is genetic, and the exact same genetic makeup as in 2 individuals, then if there's nothing else involved, folks, it should be expressed the same. That's the basis of this particular argument. But here's some other ideas. 57 pairs of adopted brothers of twins. Meaning this fellow has 0 genetic makeup that the brothers do, yet 11% of the time he was also a homosexual. The reason that's significant is because when you have a 3rd brother of twins, he's not the twin, but he's a brother of them. There's genetic similarities only 9.2% of the time. But here you have 0 genetic similarities and 11% of the time. The Bailey-Pillard study shot down the idea of genetics as a basis for it, and it also brought into the question and helped look into the question more of behavior or environment concepts. Here's another one. Dean Hammer, 1993, National Cancer Institute. He set out to discover the gay gene. And folks, what he found was his hypothesis was that homosexuality is passed through the mother's X chromosome. So if I can find a homosexual man, I will look through the mother's lineage and see if there are other homosexuals in the mother's lineage. Thus the X chromosome concept. What he found was that there's a section called Q28 on the X chromosome. I will warn you now, and it is being recorded so everybody who hears this will know. I'm not advocating that you go Google XQ28. Yeah, everybody heard that. if you want to research this, be aware of what you will find. Because if you want to know what the gay gene is according to society, folks, this is the best that I have seen that them point to. The problem is, Dean Hammer was later brought up on investigation tampering charges. He would notice these individuals that didn't fit his hypothesis. And instead of including everybody in there that didn't fit his hypothesis, he just dismissed them from the study. It's very convenient. I could increase my percentage if I didn't have to tell people that I had cases that didn't fit my hypothesis. Thus, it can look convincing, and I can claim XQ28 as the homosexual gene. Dean Hammer would later admit he did not find a genetic reason for homosexuality. Here's another one, though, that I want you to look at, maybe the most convincing. In 2003-2005, the Human Genome Project was completed, where they unraveled the human genetic makeup, looking for reasons for behavior issues, alcoholism, and homosexuality. Multiple different scientists looked at the same information. They put the genetic code back together, and they would all say there is no known reason in science for a genetic basis for homosexuality. Folks, that's 4 of the best opportunities that science can give us. Science, the same science now, that can look at children in womb from 4D now. The same science that can send a man to the moon and that man can live, can send a man into space. And you're telling me we cannot look into the human genome? Well, we're trying. And science has failed every time. They don't want to admit it. But here's what I want you to see, because I know my time's coming to a close. Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. The Bible will go into this concept of God allowing certain attributes of Himself to be seen through creation. And as you consider what He's doing here in Romans chapter 1, as He's basically dealing with the ungodly Gentiles, Romans chapter 2, He'll deal with the Jewish people who think that they're above anything that God has to say. So in Romans chapter 1, he goes into the concept of these Gentiles knew God, but they didn't honor God. I want you to look at 26 and 27. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, also, men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another. How dare the Holy Spirit call homosexuality unnatural if it's genetic and they can't help it? Do you realize what that says, folks? That God Himself, the Holy Spirit being part of the Trinity, He would know the genetic makeup. And yet the Holy Spirit still says it's unnatural. Well, where can you go for what is natural? The only place you can go is what was created in the beginning. And that's the concept of man and woman. There are multiple areas you could go with this, but I want you to see this concept right here. Leviticus chapter 19. I told you I was going to give you a biblical answer for what are we supposed to do in confronting culture. This idea is not just about the agendas. It's, okay, what are we going to do with it now? The reality is we can make a difference, but the children of God were being sent into a land much like ours today. And God didn't leave them without instruction, because in 19 verse 1 of Leviticus, He says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ, that means that in this particular book, they were supposed to look different. They were supposed to smell different. They were supposed to talk different. They were supposed to view different movies. They were supposed to go to different places. They were supposed to worship the way Jehovah God wanted, not the way Molech wanted or Baal. You think that would have caused them some problems in that society? Sure. Do you think they would have had to sacrifice a few things in that society? Absolutely. But see, being holy means you're separate, you're called out, you're different. We have too many Christians today in this world that want to look so much like the world for fear of being persecuted in some way, shape, or form. The Bible said it this way, if they came after the master teacher, don't you think they're going to come after my disciples? Maybe it's time we just strap on the big boy pants and realize that as Christians, it's not for the weak. It's for individuals who will stand on the Word of God in a loving manner and take whatever persecution this world and Satan will throw at us. That message desperately needs taught to our children.